Bob McKenzie's rankings are finally out, and we'll react to them on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalakash, QMJHL and crossover scout for Elite Prospects with Sebastian High, USHL and crossover scout for Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down Bob McKenzie's rankings for the 2025 NHL Draft. They just came out yesterday, and we'll be reacting to kind of the differences between our assessment of players and the one that seems to be the general consensus. Because as we know, Bob McKenzie is very well connected. His job is kind of to be more of a predictive element when it comes to draft rankings, seeing where teams are at and how much they like players. So we'll start with the top 10 in the first segment. We'll get into the second segment here. We'll look at picks 11 through 20. And then in the third segment, we'll look at picks 21 through 32 and a couple of notable second rounders that we think are worth noting here. Before we get into any of that, though, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. If you're watching on YouTube, as usual, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started right away. And I think we can breeze through the top four because we just talked about them yesterday. It's the exact same top four that we have at Elite Prospects. Matt Schaefer being the unanimous number one overall pick at this stage. James Hankins at 2. Michael Misa at 3. And then Porter Martone at 4th overall. So that same group being kind of the same that we have Elite Prospects and relatively the same that we see across the scouting world right now is pretty interesting. It tells a bit of a story on this side, right?
Yeah, it does. And I think the notable takeaway here from the top four is perhaps a little bit less the order of these players and more the fact that the player at number one, Matthew Schaefer, who is out indefinitely with that broken collarbone that he suffered at the World Junior Championships and is not a guarantee to return this season in time to still see playing minutes before the draft rolls around. He was unanimous in the first overall voting among all, I believe, 9 or 10 scouts polled by Bob McKenzie here. Clearly impressed not only with his ramping up of play with the Erie Otters after his recovery from mono, which was really impressive in the span of like a month or month and a half prior to the World Junior Championships, and he just started hitting the ground running after a couple shaky performances, and the fact that he's unanimous here, I think, speaks volumes about just the potential and upside that NHL teams see in this player. And we just did our prospect spotlight on him, which I can link up in the cards above. But a lot of the comps that came out of this Bob McKenzie ranking for Matthew Schaefer were very similar to the ones that we were discussing as well in our episode. Players like Zach Werenski, Shea Theodore, Scott Niedermayer's name came up as well, Miro Heiskanen. A lot of these really mobile number one defensemen, and that seems to be the consensus opinion here now with Matthew Schaefer, that this guy has number one upside, like really significantly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that reflects itself in scouts' opinions across the NHL. I mean, this kid's phenomenal. He's shown phenomenal things both for Erie and in his game in 5 minutes that he played for Team Canada. Very interesting guy. And obviously then James Hagens, Misa, Martone again. We've talked about these guys ad nauseum this week, so we'll roll right through and talk about the number 5 pick, which is the first major difference between our rankings and Bob's and NHL scouts. Obviously, Anton Frondell is still at number 5. It's still in the top 5 conversation there for the 2025 NHL draft. And I think Jimmy, our Sweden scout over at Elite Prospect, said it well. I mean, he's straight up said, I've watched every single game to try to see what we're missing. I feel like there's a significant gap between our team's assessment and a decent amount of teams' assessments of Anton Frondell versus NHL teams' perspective on him. I think it comes down to the size, defensive ability, and shot combination. Like, that's a great foundation for an NHL player. And I don't think anyone at our team doubts that Anton Frondell is going to play in the NHL. I think the main concern that we have is regarding his ability to be an impactful one, a top 6 full-time NHLer, or even a top liner at that. If you're picking the top 5, you're looking for that type of player. He's he's garnering a lot of comparisons to Dalibor Dvorsky, which I really see in his game. Like there's a lot of similarities there. So I think it's pretty interesting that they still in this top 5 conversation, right?
It is, and I mean, Craig Button was also interviewed during that show with these midseason rankings, and his player comp for Anton Frondell, who he has at number 2 on his board, is Sasha Barkov. So there are some people in the industry that see some really significant offensive upside here, but our doubts, I think, are very much down to pace and transition impact, and the complete lack of that this season really limits just the projection of the offense at the next level, because he's not going to be able to score every single goal off the cycle because he has a wicked shot, but it's not an Ovechkin or a Line kind of release that you can make a whole career out of. But again, the defensive impact's really good. I can see why that maturity is enticing to NHL teams, but the valuation here is a bit different. We see a player that might be a third line center. NHL teams see a very bona fide top 6 guy.
Yeah, I also think another part of that is just another concern of our teams is that he's dominating a lot through just pure physical imposition, right? Like
Yeah.
he's 6'1", 200 pounds at his age. Like that, it comes with advantages at the current level, but it can also hinder a player at higher levels. We saw it with Jesse Puljujärvi. We saw it with Kaapo Kakko so far in his career in the NHL. Being bigger and stronger than guys at a young age actually gives you an advantage that you very quickly lose once you get to the NHL, especially since Frondell's mainly been playing J20 this year, mainly been playing, he played at the World Junior A Challenge, he played at the under 18s last April. This isn't a player who's been consistently playing pro minutes against bigger, stronger guys. This is a guy who hasn't really had a lot of opportunities to learn how to use his mechanics better. So that's a bit of a concern as well. But let's move on to number 6, because this one's interesting as well. This is a player I'm a major fan of. I love this kid, and I still think that's a tad bit high. 6th overall is Caleb Desnoyers on Bob McKenzie's rankings, and Desnoyers is 6'1.5", 178-pound left shot center. Very, very effective face-off taker, forechecker, playmaker as well. Very, very competitive, real good drive to get better. To all the mental intangibles are there with Desnoyers. And I talked about it in the scouts meeting, which will also be on YouTube, which is already on YouTube by the time you're watching this, and it'll be linked below. Desnoyers is the type of player that will consistently find ways to work his way up a lineup. He constantly proves to coaches that they can trust him, that he deserves to be out there. Every level he's played, even though in terms of pure skill, you look at a guy in the same league, Justin Carbonneau, who's also a draft eligible. He's got more skill than him. But what's really interesting with Desnoyers is that he consistently outworks guys. He outperforms them, and coaches love him. And that I don't think will change in the NHL. He's going to continue working his way up lineups, continue playing up lineups. And I understand having him at 6 overall. A lot of people are big fans of Caleb Desnoyers, and I really get it. There are more skilled players. Speaking of which, at number 7, Roger McQueen, I think is a great example of that. 6'5.25", 197 pounds. He's a massive right shot center with high end skill. You look at the pure tools profile, and McQueen clears Desnoyers by far and away. But that just tells you how much NHL teams value that mental game, the hockey sense, the competitiveness, the compete, the motor. Those things really matter to teams, right?
It really does, and I mean, I think that's been very clear with also how Desnoyers has been utilized so far in his career. Not only in Moncton, where he leads a dominant team in points by at least 20. I think was the last update that you gave me on the point tallies there for Desnoyers. But beyond that, whenever he's gone out into different environments, whether it be with the national team with Team Canada or at the CHL NTDP Prospect Challenge, he always gets big minutes and earns the coach's trust, because that compete level, that buy-in, is something that is so important on the ice and in the locker room alike. And getting that kind of a character guy with potential captain or assistant captain fabric and it like woven into his material of his game, that's something that every single team's going to really, really like.
Yeah, and it's contagious as well. That's what I love about Desnoyers. He drags the team's overall performance up. I think Team Canada could have used a guy like him at the World Juniors. But moving on, number 8 overall, Victor Eklund, 5'11", 161 pounds. Phenomenal performance at the World Juniors. Outworked literally everyone. The hard skills were on display all game, all day. Very, very interesting performance from him. And he also has that playmaking ability, that transition ability. I love him. I think he's the best Swede in this class, but NHL teams don't seem to agree. Then at 9th overall, Jake O'Brien, probably a top 3 playmaker in this whole draft class. Genuinely phenomenal playmaking ability. Could find anyone, anywhere on the ice. Really hard to compete as well. Dynamic skill. He showed it off massively at the OHL Prospects Challenge. Great game from him there at a really pivotal time because there are a lot of scouts attending. And then finally, Jackson Smith at 10th overall, 6'3", left shot defenseman. He can do everything. He's a physical monster. He's got phenomenal skating. He can skate up the ice. He can defend the rush. He can defend in zone. Anything you want a defenseman to do, he can do. And he's the second best defenseman off the board here on Bob McKenzie's rankings and on ours as well at Elite Prospects. But we have him a tad bit higher. But that's our first segment done. We'll get into the second here where we discuss picks 11 through 20, and we'll focus on some interesting conversations rather than just rattle off a bunch of names. We'll get to that in just a second. Let's just take a quick break before we head into it.
From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if your first bet is a win. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every single game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has got you covered. And FanDuel has options for every kind of sports fan as well, whether you enjoy the NFL or perhaps you prefer European football with the Champions League, or maybe hockey is your sport of choice if you are listening to this podcast. Whatever it may be, FanDuel has something to offer every kind of sports fan. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment here, we'll be talking about picks 11 through 20 here at the in Bob McKenzie's rankings, his midseason rankings for the 2025 NHL Draft. And there's some interesting conversations that we need to have here regarding these rankings because from 11 to 20, things get pretty wild. We'll start off at 11th overall with Logan Henselr, who actually wasn't even a top 20 selection on our board at Elite Prospects. We saw some concerns with kind of average skill set. He's definitely an NHLer. I don't think there's any doubt about that, but there are some limitations regarding his skill set and how high up a lineup he projects, right?
I do think that is the case, but I think that his World Junior Championship performance was something that perhaps eased some of those concerns for NHL teams because he settled into a very responsible role at that tournament for Team USA. Was a really calming presence on the right side on his pairing, and he has a good frame at 6'2.5", 192 pounds with that right shot, and some really decent skating ability as well. Like the mobility is a clear factor, not only in his like activation game offensively, which he could use to explore a bit more, but especially in his defensive coverage. Like the combination of stick work and mobility is something that has helped him massively against NCAA competition, shutting down more physical, high-paced rushes as well. So there've been some really nice flashes with this player, but I think that the upside is not something that we have seen so far, but we're definitely going to be taking a closer look at this player from now on because clearly there's something that many other scouts are seeing that we are not just yet.
Absolutely. Moving on to number 12, we have another right shot D. This one's 6'6", almost 207 pounds. Radim Murtka from the Seattle Thunderbirds. He's an import from Czechia. Since he's joined Seattle, he's been playing 35 minutes a night. Just absolute monster physically with decent skill as well. At 13th overall, Brady Martin, the country strong 6 foot, 180 pound center of the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds. And he's a truck. Like he'll barrel through you on the forecheck. He's very interesting, but he also has that goal scoring skill. So decent name to keep an eye on. Another big guy, Lyndon Lakovic at 14th, 6'4", 190 pounds. And he's a real skill guy. He's more of a finesse guy and a defensive player rather than a pure, tear your head off forechecker. Which is very interesting at his size, and just it gives him a lot more runway. Like, he's got things to develop on that side, which he could develop with time. And if he does, watch out. This kid is massive. At 15, we have Carter Bear. We've talked about him at depth. The 6-foot bulldog who just absolutely loves to just. He'll score a goal with his teeth if he can. He's a very interesting player with decent skill as well. Malcolm Spence at 16th overall, 6'1", 203 pounds, phenomenal skater. He's a left shot winger, and he's got very interesting skills, but has been a bit bland as of late. He was higher up boards, but he's kind of slowed down. And then at 17th overall, the guy we talked about earlier regarding the QMJHL debate, Justin Carbonneau, ends up at 17th. And this is finally where I think he should be, because on a lot of boards, he's anywhere between 20 and 30. But finally he shows up at 17th overall, and this makes a ton of sense given his skill set, right?
It very much does. I mean, this is a very high event kind of hockey player with high end tools, and within our scouting staff, we've seen comparables like Trevor Connolly, even draft year Tim Stützle, in terms of the profile at this stage in their development of making a lot of mistakes, but trying a lot of things, and that exploration of the toolkit really being quite a positive impact on the development, even though it can be quite ugly quite often at this point. It still is a decent springboard to work from for an NHL team drafting, but Carbonneau was definitely a bit more raw than Stützle was in his draft year. I mean, he was playing against pro competition in Germany as well and doing very well in that position. So not saying that Carbonneau is the next Tim Stützle, but in terms of trajectory of development rather than destination of it, there are some links there. But moving on, we have a couple more interesting names here. We have a big physical mobile defenseman from the OHL with Kashan Aitchison at 18th overall. He's a left shot for the Barrie Colts, and I mean, he's been fantastic this season, right?
Yeah, absolutely. He's been the most violent board player I've seen ever. Like, he tries to tear guys' heads off along the boards, and he takes pride in it, and he gets really aggressive, but he toes the line at the same time. You don't see him take any major penalties. Really good at kind of anticipating, okay, the player's about to turn his back, let me back off. Oh, his shoulders exposed, let me truck through it. Very good physical player. I think the skating holds him back a tiny bit in terms of his overall projection, but he's got decent activation skills. He jumps into plays frequently. He gets up the ice. He tries things, which is very interesting for a physical, more shut down-ish defenseman. He's very interesting. And then finally, Ivan Ryabkin, 19th. It was about time we started talking about him, because we didn't really get to talk about him too much in our episode because he didn't make the first round. He's at 19th overall on this board, and yeah, it's a warranted slip. Like, he's had a very tough time at every level. Right now he's overweight, 5'11", 201. Drags his feet defensively, not really getting into shooting lanes in his own zone. I think you can attest to that as well, given that he plays in Muskegon now in your neck of the woods in the USHL. But what's your assessment? Like, in a couple words, what's your overall assessment of why Ivan Ryabkin is slipping down so many boards?
I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the lack of engagement on both sides of the puck. I think like effort level would go a really long way in also just building some bridges. I mean, a lot of things have gone wrong in his season so far, and his move over to Muskegon was anything but smooth. And I think being a bit more engaged and buying into the system that Muskegon wants to play, rather than just kind of trailing around at the blue line in the defensive zone, waiting for a teammate to cause a turnover before he just springs up the ice, and being proactive in trying to cause that turnover as well, which would give him more on-puck chances in the end. I think that would go a long way, but there have been multiple things, but we've talked about him a decent amount in the past week, and we'll definitely be doing a prospect spotlight on him in the coming months, so that's something to look forward to. But to wrap up this segment, there's one very interesting player here ranked at number 20th overall, and that's Cullen Potter, the 5'10" center of Arizona State University, who was originally meant to be playing with the NTDP this season, but decided to just kind of call his own number and take the leap into college hockey as an undersized draft eligible. And it's been going so well. I mean, getting away from the NTDP is good for any prospect. I mean, Will Horkoff is already reaping the benefits of that as well with his transfer to Michigan. But talk me through Cullen Potter's style of play and just why his dynamic skill is one of the more interesting ones in the back half of the first round here in this board.
He just creates so much with his feet. Like, he's just able to just barrel through the neutral zone with so much speed. He overwhelms defenders wide, but he's also able to cut in and make plays. He's still a slight bit peripheral. I think that's something that needs to come with some time. But overall, I think the skill level is high enough with him. He's a decent playmaker. He's got a great shot. I think the main issues are size and peripheral play. That's not always a winning combination in the NHL, but clearly teams like him. And I think the move to Arizona State is great for his career because he's becoming a key part of that team already at such a young age. So very interesting progression from him. And again, great decision to move away from this this NTDP squad because it is not looking good on that side for the U18s. But that's our second segment done. We'll get into the third segment where we talk about picks 21 through 32 real quick and also give you a bit of a rundown of a couple of the highlights outside of the first round. We'll get into that in a sec. But just before, let's take a quick break and hear from our sponsors. If you're looking to buy cheap tickets last minute to any event, Game Time is the best place to secure them. It's safe, secure, incredibly easy to use, and they're absolutely obsessed with saving you money. They've got deals at every step of the way, last minute deals, flash deals, zone deals, and even the Game Time guarantee to make sure you always get the best price for your tickets. And now with all-in pricing, which you can toggle in the app, you'll get the price after fees, after taxes, right in the selection so you can make the best decision for your wallet. And it's not just for sports, comedy, theater, whatever requires a ticket you can find over at Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, super simple. You just create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. So download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, let's close things off here with the rest of the first round for Bob McKenzie's mid-season rankings, and we'll have a couple of interesting conversations in here. At 21st, to give you the rundown, Blake Fiddler, 6'4", right shot D, who defends incredibly well, and is starting to explore his offensive game, but isn't really all that polished on that side, which lends him to be a bit lower down the board here on Bob McKenzie's rankings. I think that's fully understandable. At 22nd overall, we have a player who we have a big disparity with the public sphere, with the private sphere or the NHL sphere regarding our assessment of him. Braden Coots. He's listed on Bob McKenzie's board at 6'3", 201 pounds. Listen, have you seen a picture of him next to Cam Robinson, who's 6'2"?
In stilts, perhaps.
Yeah, like with 5-inch boots on, maybe. He's clearly like 5'11". $190, but he's really good. He's a high-end, energetic player. Great skater, high-end motor, tries hard on every play, second and third efforts on loose pucks. On top of having some decent playmaking skill, some decent inside drive. There's some offensive upside there. We like him a bit more at elite prospect. We have him at 13th overall. Which I think is fair given his skill set and what he brings to the game. Reminds me a lot of Easton Cowan in some ways with that energy level and that drive. Maybe not the version we saw at the World Juniors, but that's another story. Moving on to 23rd, another play. We have a big discrepancy with Bob McKenzie's rankings regarding Jack Nesbitt of the Windsor Spitfires. He's a big center, but I'm still confused as to what exactly he is. He gives me so many inconsistent viewings on every single day. Like, it's tough to get a grasp of what kind of player Jack Nesbitt is, right?
Yeah, it really can be. I mean, he ended up at 47th on our board at Elite Prospects in our very recent ranking meeting. But he's been really solid, especially here in the back half of the stretch with the Windsor Spitfires. He has 11 points in his last 10 games, and I mean, he's 6'4", 183 pounds, the left shot centerman. That is a profile that NHL teams really like. He's hovering right around a point a game there in Windsor. He's been playing quite well with some pretty good players on that team. I mean, Liam Greentree, of course, is the big standout there. But he's been having some nice combination play with those guys, but we haven't quite seen the level of upside and like perhaps top six flashes in his game that may have warranted this ranking among NHL scouts. But moving on to the next one, another player that we are not quite as optimistic about, but this time from the NCAA, we have Sascha Boumedienne, the Swedish left shot defenseman, is a highly intelligent player, very capable in the breakout as a passer, but among the worst skaters in this draft class. Like, he's better than Riker Lee, we'll give him that, but not by very much.
I think you can find 5-year-olds who are better skaters than Riker Lee, but that's
I might be a better skater than Riker Lee. And
yeah. Yeah, I have a grandpa's knees, and that might be better. Anyway, Sascha Boumedienne, I think, like you said, great, really smart player, awful skater, but really, really good breakout passer, which circumvents his skating issues. But you can't circumvent your skating issues as a defenseman in the NHL. That's going to have to come some ways. He's going to need to improve his skating to full grade, if not two, in order to be an effective defender at an NHL level. But we'll see if a team's really confident with their skating development. Take a shot. He's a very smart player with really decent skills. At 25th, Ben Kindle. He also showed up on our board at Elite Prospects around this range. We had him at 23rd, I believe. Below average skater with not that much size, but he's one of the most effective creators in the WHL this year for the Calgary Hitmen. Him and Tanner Howe have started developing some chemistry since he's joined, along with Owen Telk as well. That's a trio of players that have been creating some chemistry, and Kendall is at the middle of it, and he's on a ridiculous point streak right now, so he deserves to be here. Jack Murtagh from your neck of the woods, good skater, good shot, high end motor. But IQ concerns more or less from what you've explained to me, and I've seen it as well. His
Vision
playmaking's
mainly.
yeah, but his playmaking is improving slightly. 6 foot, 200 pounds. He's a sturdy guy too, so can throw that weight around. He's an interesting guy. But another player here that we have a massive gap with Bob McKenzie's rankings, Milton Yestreen of Moto in the SHL. He's a very interesting player because he really dominates his production through habits, not skill, right?
Absolutely. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's an intelligent and complementary player that has excelled in terms of the give and go game this season, playing at pace, playing a very pro style of game, not necessarily in terms of like contact initiation habits or anything on the physical side. That still needs to grow a ways. But in terms of the off puck routes, the look offs, just the habits to create little pockets of space, both on and off puck in the offensive zone, has been really impressive this season and has allowed him to combine really nicely with some highly skilled players, both internationally and in the league this year. And I mean, the World Junior Championships was a place where he really shone this year, right?
Yeah, absolutely. He was able to showcase his above average smarts, his above average motor, his ability to outwork guys. I think it was great at that tournament for sure. Let's move on to number 28 here. We have Joshua Ravensburging, our first goalie off the board. He's a 6'5", 190-pound goalie. He's a southpaw. He's a right catching goalie, which you don't see a lot in the NHL. But he could beat the odds on that side. Really good reflexes and instincts. I really like him, and he's been really good for the Prince George Cougars this year. Then at 29th overall, a player that we're not as high on it at Elite Prospects. We have a bit more concerns. Cole Rezhny, 5'10", 185 pounds. He was fine at the Holinka. But since then, for Victoria, it's been kind of on and off performances, are not really consistent. That's kind of been an issue this year. Then Cameron Schmidt at 30th overall. We have him at 10th Elite Prospects. And I feel like we're the only ones to have him this high. A lot of teams have a lot of doubts around Cameron Schmidt, but his physical game is a key part of his skill set, right? Like that's just that ties into how good he is so effectively.
It really does. He's a very intense, very aggressive, quite violent player as well. Really good contact initiation habits, really good leverage mechanics as well in board battles. Like he keeps his feet moving. He's really difficult to pin down and contain. And you pair that intensity and doggedness with elite level skating and elite level puck skills across the board, whether you're talking about the passing, shooting, or handling abilities. And you have a player that can create just about as dynamic offense as anyone in the entire WHL this season. And while there are question marks with that frame, he has just about every compensatory habit or tool that you could wish for in an 18-year-old's profile.
Absolutely. And to close things off here with the final two names of the first round, when in doubt, just draft big and draft mobile. We have Haoshi Wang or Simon Wang of the Oshawa Generals, recently signed from the King Rebellion in the OJHL. Almost 6'6", 215 pounds, left shot defenseman, and he skates like the wind. It's really it's almost eerie to watch. Watching him skate around. And Charlie Trethewey is a big guy from your neck of the woods. Big guy, really mobile. Both of them are still very, very raw. I think that's the key kind of component with both of them is you're drafting them for 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the line, what they're going to be. It's a long road ahead to the NHL, but both of them have the physical tools and the mobility to make it as defensemen. So very
For sure.
interesting pair of guys there. Honorable mentions real quick. Bill Zonin at 34th overall, 6'1", 180 pounds, and he is a truck. He is a monster and a great playmaker as well. We also have Cameron Reed, who we had at 11th overall, who shows up at 37th on this board. I think it's mainly due to size. I don't think there's any world in which Cameron Reed projects lower than Charlie Trethewey in terms of overall NHL upside. Then Eric Nilsson is at 36th as well as a Swedish forward who's a bit of a Swiss Army knife. And then we have Adam Banach surprisingly at 39th. What do you think of that?
I think it's interesting. I mean, Banach's an intelligent, highly intense playmaking forward who's been playing well at center, has good defensive reads and habits, but he is really small and very peripheral in his offensive creation, and that's where a lot of the doubt comes from in terms of his projectability. But clearly, NHL teams are still looking at this player, and despite the size concerns, I mean, he's 5'7", they still like him enough as a second round option. I don't think you're going to see him beat a top 40 pick come draft day, but the fact that he's in the second round conversation and quite actively so, I think is very interesting in terms of the valuation of his intensity and his puck skills.
Yeah, I mean, he was an honorable mention on a top 64, so it gives you an idea of kind of the gap between our assessment and NHL teams. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For a second listen of the day, remember to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. Make sure to check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey as well. We've got Flip and Steele giving you the best advice about what's going on around fantasy sports, especially for hockey. So this has been Hattie Kalakash with Sebastian High. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you tune in next time.